So thank you everyone so much for joining us for our first webinar of 2017. We hope you're excited to learn how you can use JavaScript to add e-commerce to any website. My name is Sarah Chisholm and I'll be moderating today's session. For those of you having to cut out halfway through the presentation or your connection drops or anything like that, we'll be recording the webinar and providing everyone with a copy by the end of the week. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them throughout the presentation using the questions panel. We'll try and answer them near the end of the webinar. Note that this webinar will include some live coding examples, so feel free to ask questions while Tessa's live coding, and we'll ask in the spur of the moment. So now on to our host, Tessa Thornton. I'm proud to introduce her. She's a front-end developer here at Shopify. Tessa is a fundamental part of our BuyButton development team and will walk you through Shopify's JS Buy SDK and BuyButtonjs library. Tessa is also a mentor and instructor for Ladies Learning Code, so we're very excited to have her here with us today. That being said, I won't make you guys wait any longer. I'll hand over the reins to Tessa and we can get started. Just hold on one moment. And there you go, Tessa. You should have the reins.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So let me just get this widget out of the way. So today I'm going to be talking to you all about developing with Shopify using JavaScript. Specifically going to be talking about 2 JavaScript libraries that we've written in the last year to make this easier for developers. So I'm just sort of getting set up here. I wasn't expecting this big panel on my screen. So I'm just going to start talking a bit about why we decided to write these JavaScript libraries and why we've made JavaScript a priority. Before about a year ago, we didn't really have much in the way of JavaScript resources for developers. Everything was pretty focused around the Liquid and Ruby ecosystems. So we decided to go with to focus on JavaScript because primarily because it's a language that most of you already know. So we surveyed partners last year, and we found that about 85% of partners said that JavaScript was the language they use most frequently, and that was by far the largest segment of our partner base. Another reason is that JavaScript and JavaScript tooling is very flexible, so it allows you to develop in an environment that you're comfortable with, regardless of your build system, tools, CMS, framework, whatever you're interested in and whatever you are comfortable with. Also, JavaScript is flexible and can run anywhere in any browser environment or even in Node. And finally, the JavaScript community is also very active, and there's a huge ecosystem of resources available to JavaScript developers, and so therefore to anyone who is developing with JavaScript. So so the 2 libraries that we've made are for developing storefront experiences, so interfaces that would allow people to purchase things, add to a cart, those kinds of experiences. So that is sort of the same functionality that Liquid would provide through creating Shopify themes. So I was just going to go over the differences there and why you would want to use one versus the other. So Liquid is a tool specifically for building themes for the online store channel. So hosted online store is when you have a website that's, got a myshopify.com address, probably a custom domain, but you use a theme written in Liquid, and that's your storefront, and that's hosted on Shopify. The JavaScript solutions are a bit different. They're for when you have a site hosted elsewhere. So maybe you have a website hosted on a static site somewhere. Maybe you have a WordPress site hosted on a shared host. Maybe you have a custom solution or custom website deployed to a cloud engine. So the JavaScript solutions will allow you to put online store functionality like shopping basically on one of those websites without using Liquid or without having an online store. So those are going to be hosted off of Shopify, and because of that, you don't need the online store channel, meaning that you can use the $9 a month plan. So to build for Shopify with JavaScript, we have these two libraries that we built in the last year that will help you do that. So we have the JS Buy SDK, which is an API client that gives you access to product listing data and lets you manage shopping cart. And then we have BuyButtonjs, which is a UI library to create storefront interfaces. I'm going to go into a lot more detail about these two. So we're going to talk first about the JS Buy SDK. So JS Buy SDK is an API client that we built on top of our REST API using Fetch for making HTTP requests. So we released this around Unite last year, and its purpose is to give you access to product listings data outside of the online store environment. And it sort of gives you the ability to manage and to retrieve and manage this data without writing all the boilerplate that comes along with using JavaScript to consume a REST API. So normally if you wanted to write a JavaScript app or JavaScript script to consume a REST API, there's a lot of boilerplate you have to write, there's authentication to worry about, there's dealing with AJAX requests across platforms. So we wanted to just take care of that stuff for you and let you focus on building your custom solutions. So features of the JS Buy SDK. So it has a promise-based interface, which is really useful for always being able to be sure that all your operations have completed before you move on to the next step. So you're not, say, trying to buy a product before it's finished loading. We have models with dynamic properties, meaning that when you update, say, a product model to change the selected variant, the next time you access the selected variant property, it will be that new one that you set it to, so you don't have to keep track of those things yourself. It has a fairly small footprint. It's a small library. I think it's under 30 kilobytes minified at the moment. And we also include polyfills for browser support back to IE9. So I'm going to go in fairly quickly into a bit of a demonstration here, just to show you how you use the JS Buy SDK and how you would use it with your Shopify admin to fetch a product and add it to a cart. So I'm just going to exit out of Keynote here. And so I just have a code pen right here that is just a very basic setup for using the JS Buy SDK. So I'm just going to run through what I have already here. So I have, I'm just going to bump up the size of it, yeah. So I have a couple of divs that have IDs. Down here I have references to those divs using JavaScript, jQuery. And I have this initialization script I'm going to talk about in a second. So if I just go into my panel here, it shows me that I'm including Shopify Buy, which is the JS Buy SDK, and also I'm including jQuery, which is not at all necessary. It's just going to make it easier for the purpose of doing the live coding. It's just going to let me type a little bit less and make it a little bit easier to follow along. But you don't need jQuery to use a JS Buy SDK. So the first thing that we do here is we initialize the client. So the client is the main object that you're going to use to retrieve data, create cart, and basically interact with the API. So we have this build client method, and it takes a configuration object. So we have these three keys that we need to provide, API key, domain, and app ID. So I'm going to show you how to find these in your Shopify admin. So this is sort of our dummy store here. So have the BuyButton channel installed, which is necessary to use the JS Buy SDK. BuyButton channel is free. You can just install it from the App Store, I believe. So when I go to the BuyButton home screen, there's this JavaScript Buy SDK card here. I'm going to create token. And so down here, I have access to all the tokens that I've created, or I can create new ones. I'm just going to use an existing token because I've created a bunch. So the important information here is the app ID, which is 6, and the access token. We don't need the title. That's just for your own reference. So I'm going to, well, actually, I've already copied over that API key, which is the token. the app ID is 6, and the domain is your full myshopify.com domain, including the myshopify.com part. So this is sort of my basic setup here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a cart. So just creating a cart object in memory. So client create cart. And create cart is an asynchronous method like a lot of the methods for the JSBuy SDK, because though right now it's just being stored in local storage, in the future we may have your cart stored on a server, so that would be an asynchronous request. So I'm going to add a .then method, which is how we chain a method onto the end of a promise. So once the create cart has resolved, then we're going to run this function. Cart is what we get back from our create cart method. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the current subtotal into a div. So I have this div called total. Say total, we say dot text, cart dot subtotal. So my total is currently $0 because there's nothing in my cart. So nothing too exciting so far, but now we're going to get a product and display that on the screen. So I'm going to say client.fetch product, and then I need to pass in a product ID. So to get a product ID, I'm going to go into my admin, products, and let's say this is the product that I want. And I'm just going to grab this last section of the URL. That's the ID right here. So paste that in. And again, this is an asynchronous request, so I need to use .then. And what I get back from this is the product object. I'm just going to console log that to show what we're getting back. There we go. So in my console here, I have this product object. So you can see I've got title, images, options, selected variant, all these various attributes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a button that when you click on it, adds the product to the cart, and it's just going to have the name of the product on the button. So I'm going to create a button element. And the text of the button is going to be the title of the product. And then I'm going to append this to the DOM in my product div that I've got up here. So there's my button. It's got the title of the product in there. So what I want to do now is add an event handler to that button so that when I click on it, I can add it to the cart. So button.click, which is just a jQuery shorthand for adding an on-click event handler. And so we have this method in the JSBuy SDK. I'm just going to show you the docs for a second here. So my cart model. So this is the method that we're going to be using here, create line items from variants. So we'll see that it takes this object as its argument, and that object has two keys, the variant and the quantity. So I'm going to say cart dot, oops, just copy and paste that because that's a long method name. And so my variant, I'm just going to pick the default selected variant because there's by default just the first variant is selected. So I'm going to say product.selected variant, and the quantity is going to be 1. So I'm not going to see anything happen there because it's an asynchronous request and we haven't done anything to update the DOM either. So I'm going to say .then, This gives me a reference to the updated cart, but the original cart has also been mutated, so it doesn't actually matter there. So now I can say, let's update that total. So total dot text, just like we did before. So now every time I click the button, it's adding another item to the cart, so my total is going up. So it would be kind of nice if our cart actually said what was in it rather than just saying how much it all costs. So I'm going to actually also add a line item for every item in the cart so that we can see the contents of our cart. So my cart has a line items array. Just show you the cart object. So we have this line items array, and in it we have line items which are the same as your products pretty much. They've got price, properties, etc. So I'm going to loop through that array. Say for cart.lineitems.forEach. Before I go appending things to my cart, I'm going to empty it out just so that I'm not recreating them each time through the loop. So, or each time I click the button. So I'm going to say cart.empty. Then I'm going to say cart.append. Let's make it a paragraph. And just put the title of the item. So you see it doesn't change each time I add a new one because it's the same product, we're just updating the quantity. So I'm just going to change the text here so that we're also showing the quantity. And that's going to be item.quantity. So now as the quantity goes up, the price goes up as well. Shouldn't have added a space there. So now we've got our cart being created, our product being fetched, and our product adding to the cart. So the last thing we want to do is just get this checkout button to work. So I'm going to just add an event handler to my checkout button. And just window.open. And the URL, so the cart has a property called checkout URL. That is going to always be updated to purchase the items that we've chosen. So checkout, oops, why didn't that work? Did I not spell that right? Oh, looks like I've got this wrong. So I'm just going to take a look at the documentation here. I must have had that spelled wrong.
Sorry, Tessa, can I interrupt you for a second? We have a question.
Sure.
So without making it update quantity, can we make it add first time and second time when we click to remove the product from cart?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, no problem. So this is from Mohammadi. I'm really sorry if I just butchered your name. The question is, without making it update quantity, can we make it add the first time and second time when we click to remove the product from cart?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean here.
If you'd like to specify your question more, we'll address it later. Thank you so much. You can keep going, Tessa.
Okay. So looks, because I didn't put cart, so cart.checkout URL, obviously. So that's a capital U. So now add things to the cart. Checkout will take me to Shopify checkout. This, of course, this variant seems to be out of stock, which is my bad, but and we don't have anything set up to deal with out of stock items. But this is the checkout URL that you would go to from the online store as well. So that's a fairly basic demo of the JS Buy SDK. It's very simple, bare bones example, doesn't really do much, but just sort of shows you what's possible there. So afterwards, I will send out this URL if you want to play around with this. But again, you might want to. It's not the greatest, most maintainable code. It's just quick for demo purposes. So I'm just going to head back.
Perfect. Sorry, we have 2 more questions. They're both from Van Tucker. How do you add more than one item to a cart, like a custom quantity? So if you wanted to update the quantity from your cart?
So to do sort of other operations on the cart, we have the documentation here for the cart model. So that tells you all the things that you can do with a cart. So what you'd want to remove a line item is the cart remove line item method. So that takes the ID of the line item that you want to remove, and you can just call that on the cart. And then if you wanted to update the quantity or update a line item, we have an update line item method. And then if you wanted to add more than one to the cart at a time, then in the create line items from variants method, there is a quantity property that you can just set to whatever you want.
Awesome. And the second question, I guess you kind of addressed it with the documentations, but how do you remove an item from a cart?
Remove an item from a cart. Yeah, so that was in this example, go through it just because I'd have to wire up the event handlers, which would take a while, but you would basically have an event handler for, say, a button here, and when you click it, it would call the cart dot remove line item, and it would send the ID of that line item, which you could specify using the maybe a data attribute or something on the cart item.
Perfect, and we got clarification on our first question. So he asks, for example, when we click on a product, the GNIT, it will update a price and subtotal, and then when we click it the second time, it will remove it from cart. Is that kind of functionality built into the JS by SDK?
So that's just something that you would have to customize through your own event handlers. So you would have to add some logic to the event handler for the line item, saying that would keep track of how many times you clicked it. So the JS by SDK is just sort of giving you the methods to manage your cart. How you build an interface around that is really up to you.
Perfect, and we'll answer this one last question before we move forward. This is from Vitaly. So does the JavaScript by SDK return product stock in JSON?
So you will not get the actual inventory levels, if that's what you mean, because that's easily scammable by bots. But you will be able to tell whether or not an item can be purchased. So that will tell it'll be either available or unavailable. And then in terms of actual data format, the raw API request comes back in JSON, but the JS by SDK will have that parsed into a JavaScript object that has all sorts of convenient methods and getters and setters on it.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to go back to my presentation now. So I'm just going to talk for a second about the kinds of things that you can build with the JavaScript by SDK. So you can build really highly customized interfaces. So with a tool like the JS by SDK, it's just whatever your imagination can come up with. You can build any kind of interface you'd like, as long as it sort of has those concepts of a product variance carts, which you'd be familiar with from generally working with Shopify. You could also build your own libraries on top of it. So you could build a more specific JavaScript or even jQuery library. So for example, you could build a library that lets you put like a product gallery on a website or something like that. Also, something that I've experimented a bit with is JavaScript framework integrations. So you could do something like create a product or cart React component, or the same thing for Ember or Angular. I've actually experimented with creating BuyButton React components. It was actually fairly straightforward to do. I haven't really published that anywhere because it's not quite NPM ready, but look out for that in the future. But also you could feel free to do that if you needed to integrate with a React app or Ember app or whatever. So what we're going to talk about next is the library that we built sort of on top of the JS by SDK. which is called BuyButtonjs. So JS by SDK we released last March at Unite, and we released BuyButtonjs in November of this year. So sort of the history behind this, the idea of building this library, was that after we released JS by SDK in March, we started seeing a lot of what people were building with it in the wild, which was pretty interesting and cool, but we noticed a lot of patterns in what people were building and what people were trying to build. So we saw a lot of people writing the same boilerplate code over and over again. So things like waiting for DOM ready, and then inserting a product image and a product and a buy button, and then wiring up the buy button to the cart. And it was just a lot of repetitive code that everyone had to write, and the more times that gets written, the easier it is to make mistakes. And it was just sort of like seemed like unnecessary effort. We also saw a lot of less experienced JavaScript developers, or sort of more generalist developers, not really knowing where to start with the JS by SDK, because when you just start coding with that, all you've got is these objects in your console, and it's sort of hard to envision how you get that into, how you create an interface from that. And especially if you're not as experienced with doing JavaScript, for writing sort of JavaScript apps or JavaScript single page applications from scratch. And we also just wanted to sort of give developers this sort of out-of-the-box experience, so you could start with something that was going to be immediately useful, and then just sort of hack on it until you had exactly what you were looking for. So what we built was sort of a component library, or UI library, that lets you create interactive components with just a couple lines of code. So the components that you can create using BuyButtonjs are a product embed, a collection embed, a cart, and sort of a product details modal, which you'd be familiar with if you have seen our current BuyButton app. And then what we wanted to enable is sort of fully customizable appearance, easy to modify behaviors, and make it easy to integrate with whatever other software you're using, including tracking. Another decision we made was to have by default, the embeds be sandboxed in iframes, so that when you use BuyButtonjs to add, say, a product embed to a website, it's always going to look the same no matter what the rest of the CSS on the page is, which can be a sort of aspect of frustration with using UI libraries in general, is that CSS often interferes, and you'll maybe get your product looking different on different pages that you've embedded it on, or it might be clashing with CSS that you've already got on your website in ways that are hard to debug and hard to predict. So I'm going to just, before I talk more about BuyButtonjs, I'm just going to show you a quick demo so that you have a better idea of what I'm talking about. So let's just go back to CodePen. Find my mouse here. So this is sort of the base default experience using BuyButtonjs. So as you can see, I've got no HTML, no CSS. This is just JavaScript initialization. And all I've got here is my BuyButtonjs script. So as you can tell, I'll just right off the bat, initializing and making one method call here, we've got a lot more on our screen already. So there's a lot less work to do to just sort of get what you want, what you would basically want if you want to let someone buy things. So I'm just going to take a look at the code that I've already got here. So the initial code here is exactly the same as in JavaScript by SDK. I just literally copied and pasted this. And then we initialize the UI library, so passing in our client that we just created. And then the main method that you're going to call is called createComponent. And createComponent takes one argument as a string, which is just the type of component that you want to create. So other values might be collection, cart. And then for product or collection embeds, you pass it an ID. And so that's the same as for JS by SDK, where we grabbed the ID from our admin, from the product ID. So this gives us a couple things. So once we've created a product component, just by default, we get this product embed, which has an image. You can select a variant, select variants for different options. It gives us this little cart toggle that tells you how many items are in your cart, and it gives you this cart embed. So this is sort of your basic shopping cart, dynamic price up there, down there, and sort of your basic default e-commerce experience with checkout. So this is sort of what we were trying to create in the previous example, except that everything's kind of been created for us. So I can start to customize the appearance of this embed using a big options object. So after the ID, the next key that I can pass is called options, and there are a whole lot of things that we can put in here. So because create component created actually several elements on the screen, so we've got this product, we've got this little tab, we've got the cart itself, we have to specify which we're going to customize. So I want to customize the product, so I say product. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to customize some of the default options here. So one thing I can do is I can change the button from adding something directly to the cart. I can change it so that instead it opens up a modal window with more information. So I've got a button destination property, and I can set that to modal. So now I have this nice little modal, which has, a bit more information, has a quantity button. If you wanted to, say, hide your variant selectors here and then show them in the modal, that might be an easy way to save space. I'm going to turn that off, though, because that's not what I want here. And another easy way to change the appearance is to change the layout. So right now we've got the default layout, which is the vertical layout. I'm going to change that to horizontal. So now I've got my picture on the left. And now I'm going to add the product description. So each component has a contents object, which lets me just pass through true or false for the elements that I want to show in my embed. So I'm going to say description, true. And now my description shows up after my button here. So it looks like a lot of sort of random keys that are just in my memory, but you don't have to have that all memorized. Of course, we have documentation linked from the repo, and there's a customization section that should list all of the various options for your embeds.
Awesome. We have another question from Sam Cooper. Sam asks, how would you go about passing information into the cart? For example, if a user is sending flowers to a funeral home, how might the delivery address be pre-filled with this info?
So things that customize the actual checkout process, so shipping address, shipping details, customer information, can't be modified from the JS Buy SDK because it's only a storefront library. Right now we don't have an accessible API to modify the cart and the checkout, but that is being built at the moment by one of our backend teams. So I'm not sure what the timeline is on that, but eventually in the future we should be able to programmatically manage that kind of information, but not at the moment.
Awesome, thank you.
So I'm just going to go on and add a couple more basic customizations here. So another thing we can do is we can update the styles of this using our styles object. So instead of using regular CSS, because this is in an iframe, we can't just pass in a regular, add regular CSS to the page because it gets blocked off at the level of the iframe. So we have to pass it in specifically. So I can make this styles object, and then I can pass through a key for each part of the embed that I want to style. So one of them is button. So let's say button. And then the keys and values for this are going to be exactly the same as in CSS. So I can say background, color, navy. And I can say border radius, make this nice and round, say 30 pixels. So now I've got my nice round button. If I wanted to change the color of this toggle to match that, I have to add a different configuration object for the toggle. So right now this is all affecting the product embed. So now I'm going to add one for the toggle. And this is just going to be the same thing, styles, and it's the toggle itself. And I'm just going to copy this. And now we have our nice navy card here. So I'm just going to go back to my presentation and talk a little bit more about this customization API before we go into some more advanced examples.
Perfect. Before you continue, Tessa, we just have a quick question from Tom, and he's just wondering if you can modify the text on the Shop Now button.
Absolutely. I'll just demo that quickly because that's an easy one. So we also have a text object. Oops. And so I'm just going to modify the button. And so let's change it to add to cart. And so the text that you can change would be there's actually not a whole lot of text here that you can update because most of it just comes from the product itself. So like the title you would edit in your Shopify admin, same with the price and all this text here. But things like the add to cart text, part here where it says cart, part here where it says checkout, you can change, which makes it really easy if you want to, for example, internationalize. Oops.
That's perfect, thanks.
So we worked pretty hard on making this customization API something that would give you a lot of flexibility while not being too hard to learn. So basically the way everything is customized is with just big options objects. So if you've ever configured a jQuery plugin, it should look fairly similar. We just give you a lot of options and just a lot of different possible values for them. And because there are so many different options, the documentation is usually a good place to start looking for what you might want to modify. So for each element that gets created by the UI library, for example, so for the cart, for the product, for the toggle, for the modal, you can customize the contents, so what gets shown in each element, the order that the components appear in. So say you wanted the button to be before the price instead of after, you can change that. You can update the styles as we saw. You can update the text. You can also change the actual templates that create the HTML for each component. It's a little bit more advanced, but you can actually edit the mustache templates that create the HTML. And you can also add some events, both as event handlers on the actual DOM elements, and there are a couple lifecycle events that you can hook it to. And the styles API is CSS based, so anything that is a valid CSS property you can use as a key for your in the styles object. So we're just going to keep going with the whole live coding idea, showing you a couple slightly more advanced customizations. So I think I'm going to keep going with this example here, but I'm going to change it quite a bit. So I think I might actually just get rid of, well, I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of the description, get rid of the horizontal bit. And yeah, I don't like that border radius or that color. So my goal with this customization that I'm going to do next is to basically make my product embed a lot more compact. So this would be ideal if I wanted to fit a lot more products in the amount of space, or if I just wanted to make something that's a little bit less intrusive, takes up a little bit less space, and then once you click on it, it will give you more information, open up that modal. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just go into the contents and I'm going to take a whole lot of things out. So let's say options false, that's going to save me a lot of space. Say price false, And I'm even going to say title, false. So just got the shoe and the button. Now, one thing that I think would be nice before you click on this button is if you could actually see the price right in the button. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like so that you know what I'm talking about. So sort of like this example here. This is something that we actually saw in the wild that we thought was a cool example. So sort of recreate this look where you've got the price right there. So to do that, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to actually edit the template that creates this button. Because right now, all it does is it renders that text that you've set. So editing the templates is a little bit more advanced because you need to know a bit about mustache templates and what data is being rendered in the templates. But the easiest way to do that is to just start with what's already there. So I'm going to go into the BuyButtonjs code to get what the default template is. So this is Shopify/BuyButtonjs. This is an open source repo. All the code is just here for you to look at. I'm going to go into source and templates, and this is where all the mustache templates that render the components live. So in product.js, you can see I've got this mustache template for the button. And I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to add that here. And because we don't have a preprocessor in CodePen, I'm going to say change this to var. So that's not doing anything right now. That's just a string. Mustache templates, if they're not being preprocessed, they're just strings like any other string. So it's a little bit more complicated than you expect because we've got things like, we want to make it look different if the button's disabled. But it's fairly straightforward to read. So we've just got access to this data object, and it's got classes on it, it's got properties, it's got data. So what we want to do if we want to put the price in that button is I'm going to go back to my source code. I'm going to find where the price template is, and I'm just going to put the price template inside the button template. So here's price. Got all this stuff here. Again, it's a little bit more complicated than you'd expect because it wants to check to make sure that there is a selected variant before displaying the price. So I'm just going to copy all of that. And I'm going to put it after the button text. So I'm going to add a nice little pipe character and then paste that in. It's going to be mad at me because I've got a multi-line string, so I'm just going to put that all in one line. If you were doing this for real, you might want to use string concatenation or string interpolation to make this a little bit less ridiculous and easy to read, but for the purposes of the demo, I'm just going to leave it there. So we've got our long template string here. So now I'm going to make my templates object. And for button, I'm going to add in my custom button template. So there we go. Now it has the price and also the compare at price. I could also do something a bit simpler than this. I could also say just copy the default button template and add the word sale or add, I don't know, some sort of promotional text or whatever you want. So right now looks like there's not enough space for it all to be on one line, which is kind of a disappointment. So I'm going to update the width of the product in pixels. So the width is done here instead of in CSS because the iframe needs to know how wide the contents are to be able to resize. It's just one of those annoying intricacies of iframes. I've got an extra space here that I don't want. And now I need to make this text all white because it's a little hard to read. So I can find out what keys I want to target in my styles by going back to my template. I can see I've got price and I've got compare at. So I'm going to say price and there's my custom template there. I guess I can stop for some questions here if that's cool.
Awesome. Yeah, we have two from Andrew. Andrew's first question is, can you rearrange the order of elements on the page?
Yeah, you can. So we have an order array. So I'm just going to show you what all the defaults for everything is. So I have this defaults file. So each component has this order array that has every possible sort of element in order. And so you basically would just copy that and change the order that you wanted the items to appear in.
Awesome. And Andrew's second question is it possible to bring in all products from a site, or is this just for single products?
Yeah, you can bring in, you could do either a collection, or you could use, you can bring in products by array. So that's the two ways to do it. You could, using the JS by SDK, like theoretically fetch a list of all the IDs of all the products and then call create component for each one or pass it an array. But the easiest way to do it would be with a collection, which I'll show you in a little bit.
Perfect. And
so next thing is, oops, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to tell you to continue.
Okay. So now I'm just going to do a bit of style customization on this. So I'm going to overlay my button over the shoe just to give me a little bit more space to work with. So this is just going to be some custom CSS here. So position absolute, top 0, or no, sorry, top 50%, left 50%, blue. Oh. And then got this trick to get it all centered again, where we go transform. And we go translate y, negative 50%, translate x, negative 50%. And now we're nice and centered. And since it's now absolutely positioned, we need to give it a width. So let's say 75%. Oh, maybe 80. Okay, and just going to make that see-through so that it's not obstructing everything. I'm going to say background color, use RGBA. To make it, oops, half transparent. And so you can see that I've still got this hover style that turns it green. So I'm going to update the hover style here. So pseudo selectors are can be styled, but we have to nest them under the object for the parent. So I just make a key called :hover. And let's just make it regular black. So we also have a focus style, so if I tab through, it turns green. So I'm going to update that as well. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it, and change that hover to focus. So now when I focus on it, it turns black. So right now that adds to cart, I want that to open a modal instead, so I'm going to add that button destination option. Cool. And so now I want to change my toggle and my checkout button to also be black with the same hover styles. I'm also going to give it a border radius of 0 because I want kind of a more streamlined look here. So let's say border radius 0. So now the cool thing about this being just JavaScript is that without bringing in any kind of preprocessor or anything, I can share these styles by just putting them in a variable. So I'm going to make a button styles object. And I'm going to copy in some of these styles here. So I want the color, the border radius, the hover, and the focus styles. Oops, using my Vim shortcuts. Okay, so now because that's just a JavaScript object, I can use object.assign here. Here we go. And so now for my toggle, I can do the same thing. I can say button styles. And now I've got the same styles there. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the cart. Cart. And the key for that is button. So now I have the same styles there. And I only had to write it once. So this is our nice little embed, which takes up a lot less space and sort of got this stylish modern look to it. I'm going to stop and go through a couple questions again, if that is okay.
We've had two of the same questions coming in, and I don't know if this is possible for today's webinar, but would it be possible to demo collections?
Yeah, I was actually about to do that. So let's do that. So the reason that I wanted to make this nice and small is because it makes it easier to show more products at a time. So I'm going to change this to a collection embed. It's going to break because there's no collection with that ID. So I'm going to go back to my admin, go to collections. I have a sneakers collection. So I'm just going to grab the ID from the URL here and pass that through there. Okay, so we've got a bit of a problem here, which is that we've used position absolute, but no position relative. So I'm going to add a style for the wrapper, which is just called product. So the wrapper selectors are always the same name as the embed itself. And let's say position relative. It's much better. And so the width for products in a collection has to be in CSS because the size of the iframe is the entire iframe that holds all the products rather than each individual one. So I'm going to add that to this. Oops, why didn't that work? Oh, so since this is all responsive, I've used min width. So let's go min. Go. So now we have our collection of shoes all nicely lined up here. And I think this should be, yeah, nice and responsive. There we go. And so now you can just sort of go through your collection here. Another option, if you say wanted to just add 2 products, is you could say like specific products that aren't in a collection. So I can do product set. And I can pass in an array of IDs. That didn't work. Maybe it's just product. I think I might have forgotten how to do this one. Yeah, I'll have to look up the API for that one. I haven't used it in a while. But anyways, oh, because that's a collection, not a product ID, that's why. So if I go back to products and I grab one product, and then I can grab another random product, like this one. I can show just 2 arbitrary products from my shop there. So I'm going to go back to my presentation here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the more advanced customization options that we have. So as you saw, we were able to modify the template, add a custom template there, which requires a little bit of knowledge of Mustache, but if you've ever used any templating language, it should be pretty familiar. It's quite similar to Liquid, but a little bit simpler. As I said, you'd want to start with the defaults there, which you can find through the source code. You can also add entirely new elements to your component. So if I wanted to add, say, a banner to the bottom of every product embed, I could, I guess I can actually just show that. So say I wanted to add just a banner that says sales. It's not a very practical example, but I'm just going to show you how to do it. So there are 3 things that I need to match up to add an element to my component. So I need a template, I need it to be set in contents, and I need to have it in the order. So I'm going to say banner true. Banner doesn't exist yet, so add a template for it, banner. So that's just a Mustache template there, not a very exciting one. And then I'm going to add it to the order. I'm going to just say so now I've added that new component to my embed. So we also have custom events, which I'm going to, if I have a chance, I'll show you an example of some code that uses custom events. So like event handlers, you do different things on click or on hover or etc. You can add custom properties to your template. So say you wanted your templates to have access to a JavaScript variable, you can add that through an object called a viewData object. And then another more advanced option is if you want to style your components using regular CSS or Sass or whatever, you can opt out of the iframes by passing iframe false, which I'll just show you quickly. Probably going to look weird with all these other options. Oh. I don't know why that didn't change anything. Just get rid of the rest of the options. There we go. And then you can just sort of style it based on your default settings. There we go. So that's what the product set would look like without any without the default styles. And so then you could just go in and add your own CSS using regular selectors and as you wish. You can also start with our style sheet that gives you the default styles, which is available on our CDN. So that's a good option if you want to have like full control and if you want to do something really custom. But what I would suggest is if you do that you link to a specific version of the script. So in the CDN or on NPM, you can grab specific versions rather than pinning to like the latest. And that way, if anything changes, your code won't break. Okay, so we're just going to quickly go over how to get the code, and then if I have some time left, do some questions. So on the CDN, we have both BuyButtonjs and JSBuy SDK hosted, and that will give you global objects that you can reference in your JavaScript. You can also install both through NPM. So NPM install Shopify Buy will get you the JSBuy SDK, and NPM install @Shopify/BuyButtonjs will give you BuyButtonjs. You can also get the code from GitHub. The JSBuy SDK and BuyButtonjs repos are both open source. And I'm just going to quickly go over some things that we're going to be working on in the future, which is hopefully adding a cart and checkout API so that you can customize what happens in the checkout and more so in the cart. We're going to be migrating the JS Buy SDK to consume our new GraphQL API, which shouldn't change the way you use the JS Buy SDK, but it should make it a bit faster. And we're going to be open to suggestion, pull request issues, see how everyone uses it, and what's going to be most beneficial to developers. So I will do some questions now, if we have time.
Awesome, we certainly do. So I've saved some questions throughout the webinar that I felt might be more appropriate towards the end so we can discuss them a little more. So the first one is from Brad, and Brad was just wondering if we have some live examples of BuyButton in the wild.
Yes, I can probably dig some of those up for you. I was just trying to find some this morning, and the analytics service that we use to find these kinds of things went down, so I wasn't able to find any examples for you. But there have been some interesting things that people have built, and I will definitely try to look some of those up for you. And if I have time, is it okay if we go over a bit?
Yes, it's totally okay if we go over a little bit.
Okay, so after I've answered the other questions, I'll show you some of the demos that I've made just in CodePen to sort of play around with what's possible with the libraries.
Awesome. So the next question comes from Chris, and Chris is wondering how chatty is the JS Buy library? How many calls are being made each time it's being used?
So not that many. It's pretty efficient. It makes the one request for the resource that you've requested, and then everything else is modified just in memory. It won't make any updates through the server. That all just happens locally. If you batch your calls, so like if you made fetch product requests like 20 times for 20 different products, then that would make 20 requests. But you can also pass it an array of product IDs, and it will only fetch once.
Awesome, that definitely makes sense. Our next question is from Fernando, and I'm sorry, I couldn't remember if Fernando asked this during the JS Buy SDK or BuyButtonjs, but you might be able to decipher that. Being compatible with AngularJS, is it possible to implement with Ionic framework for hybrid apps?
Definitely. Anywhere that you can run JavaScript, you should be able to run the JS Buy SDK, and anywhere with a browser, BuyButtonjs should work fine.
Awesome. Ryan has a very specific, Spencer has a very specific question. We have experienced problems with the BuyButtonjs on mobile, specifically iPhone. When a product image is included, content will get cut off below. Have you heard about this before and have any suggestions for preventing this?
I do remember we had this issue with the BuyButton embeds before we migrated them to the latest version. I thought we had resolved this issue I believe it was specifically with the modals. It has to do with Apple's support for fixed positioning. I believe we've resolved this issue recently, but I will take a look at our issues and take a look to see if that's still happening.
Thank you so much. The next question comes from Gabriella, and she says, hey, can we add and use JS Buy SDK and BuyButtonjs for online stores that already exist, where the merchants could change the content?
So I'm not 100% sure what you mean. If you mean like adding it to the storefront of an online store, there's nothing stopping you from doing that, but it might be a bit redundant because it gives you access to all the same data that you would access through Liquid. I'm not sure if that's what you mean.
We'll see if Gabriella expands on that a little more in a bit. The next question comes from Dennis, and Dennis asks, a question from a non-developer. When I'm finished with all the customization and let's say want bloggers to include my new buy button, what would be needed to hand it off to them exactly?
So if you wanted to include it, sort of like let a non-developer include it just sort of anywhere on a website, I would suggest you could use the Buy Button channel on Shopify, which gives you a more like a user interface rather than a code interface for customization. So I'll just show you quickly what that looks like. So this is what the rest of my team worked on while I was building the library, is this BuyButton app here. So it gives you most of the same customization options. It's not quite as powerful, just because there's limited things that you can do with just a UI like this. But then when you click generate code here, the code that this gives you is the kind of thing that you can just copy and paste into anywhere, any website, any CMS, and it'll just work. And so this is the BuyButton app, and you would install that through the App Store, and it's free.
Awesome. Our next question comes from Brad, and Brad's asking, what are some specific use cases for using the SDK over the BuyButton.js?
So you would use the JS by SDK basically if you wanted something really custom. So I think that the sort of widgets that we've provided in BuyButtonjs would cover a lot of the most common use cases, but people always have really custom things that they want to do. Some products have like a really complicated variant system where you only want to show certain options after other options have been selected. And something like BuyButtonjs, like you could hack that in, but it would be like, you'd have to hack it in, whereas with JS by SDK, you could build something really custom to your use case, to the way you use Shopify.
Cool. Our next question comes from Vitaly, and Vitaly asks, how can you modify and control the position of the objects on a web page?
So basically, with every embed, if you're using the iframes, you get a div, and inside that div is an iframe. So that div you can just apply CSS to, and it'll behave like any other component, and the iframe should resize inside it.
Awesome. Our next question comes from Ryan, and Ryan asks, can price be manipulated with the JS by SDK, for example, things like dynamic pricing?
You probably shouldn't do that. I think you might technically be able to, but then checkout wouldn't respect those prices because checkout is basing it on the prices that you set in your Shopify admin.
Okay. Next question comes from Craig, and Craig asks, does the JS by SDK work on the Lite plan, and are there any restrictions on the checkout process as compared with a standard Shopify checkout, like restrictions on apps you can use, such as local delivery?
I'm not sure about apps. That would just sort of have to do with what apps are allowed on what plans. But yes, you can use JS by SDK and BuyButtonjs on the Lite $9 plan.
Cool. We have another question from Vitaly, and Vitaly asks, how can Shopify app developers benefit through using BuyButton? Is it possible to integrate BuyButton functionality to third-party Shopify apps?
Yeah, I'm not like, I haven't seen this yet, so I'm not 100% sure what the use cases would be. But anywhere where you're doing anything storefront side, so if your app adds something to a storefront, or if your app just has anything to do with Shopify storefronts, then yes, you could use the JS by SDK or BuyButtonjs to render products. I guess it's just failure of my own imagination that I'm not really sure what you would do that for.
Perfect. That's a great explanation. We have a question from Alex. We'll just ask a couple more questions, and then you can go back to Brad's example question. So Alex asks, in any of these setups, is it possible to have buy buttons redirect to the cart or an existing online store rather than to the checkout?
Yep. So there is an option to send to online store if you have the online store channel installed. I haven't used this in a while, so I don't totally remember what the option is called. I think so. Button destination instead of modal would be, I think it's online store. Let's see if that works. Yeah, so this page doesn't have an online store set up, but that's how that would work. So yeah, button destination online store.
Perfect. So we have two more questions. Sandip asks, can I add a pop-up button if someone clicks on a product in a product gallery page?
Yeah, so you could. I think I actually have an example of that. This is how the old default buy buttons used to look. Is you'd have this collection layout here, and then if you click on any one of the items in the collection, it pops up this modal. Or if you mean pop up by checkout, then yes, button destination can also be checkout. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. So that just takes you straight to checkout.
Awesome, and our last question comes from Mark. Using BuyButtonjs with a custom product JS template, would you be able to bring in multiple product images?
Yeah, you could. One of the examples I'm going to show will do that, and we are working on an update to make that a more easily accessible default. But the JS Buy SDK does expose an array of all the images that you've uploaded, so you can show all those images if you want.
Amazing. Now I guess we can, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say if that's it for questions, I was just going to show a couple of the cooler demos that my team has come up with.
That would be great, thanks.
Cool. Okay, so this is one of them. So I just have this collection on CodePen here. So one of the things that we did when we first made the BuyButton.js was went through Dribbble and looked at some of the cooler e-commerce examples and saw if we could replicate them. So this is sort of as a collection view where you hover over the image and it shows you your little Shop Now button. So I just thought this was kind of a fun and trendy little e-commerce kind of thing. This one uses custom templates, I believe, and custom events to add the hover events. Then this one is a bit of a more advanced example where we sort of created this apparel style option selector where instead of having the drop-down menus, you've got these buttons that you can click on and it'll show you, what's sold out, what's available. This is sort of common on apparel websites. So this uses a lot of the more advanced options. So we've got a custom template, and we also have custom DOM events, so for the clicking on the buttons. And then, so we've got these custom view data functions. So view data, you could add just like foo, text, test, and that could be available as data.foo in your templates. But you can also make functions, which are, I think in Mustache they're called lambdas, where you get the sort of an argument and a render method, and you can sort of modify what gets output. And so I'm using just these colors and sizes objects here to display the color in the box and like just have this custom display. So that is definitely a bit of a more advanced use case. Like you'd probably want to be fairly knowledgeable of just JavaScript in general to be able to make this kind of thing, but it is definitely possible. And then figured out this sort of image slider example where we've got multiple images for one product, and you can sort of show them all at the same time. So this is also using custom templates and a custom DOM event, as well as some of these lifecycle events. So when a component is initialized, there's an event triggered, and so you can sort of hook into that event. And so that's what she's done here, and updating the selected image. I think I just have. I think that's most of the more interesting examples. This one's just a very custom appearance. This is similar to the one that I showed you guys earlier with the shoe. This one uses a custom element. So I've replaced the button and title and price elements with like one component that puts them all together so that I can wrap them all in the one box, which I've called just info. So it's got its own template and it's got its own styles and it's got its own like contents. And this one is just a very customized styling. And yeah, so those are sort of some of the more fun examples of what you can make with the BuyButtonjs. JS Buy SDK, we've seen a lot of really interesting things In the early days of JS SDK, we mostly saw people building the kinds of things that now we would suggest people build with BuyButtonJS. But also, I can't remember which company it was, but there was one company that was selling, I think it was mattresses, and they had a very custom selection process where like you had to choose a size of the mattress before you could choose, I don't know, some other option value. And so they had this custom script set up so that you could only do the selection in the order that they wanted you to do, and that was like a really good use case for the JS SDK. So I guess I'll pass it back to our host if there aren't any more questions.
Awesome. Yeah, we're good for the end of the webinar, but thank you so much, Tessa, for helping out with this and agreeing to do this webinar for us. It was so very helpful and really interesting. I know everyone who participated says they're so thankful and grateful that you've answered their questions and have demonstrated a lot of the BuyButton functionalities. So thank you again so much. Moving forward, guys, we have a really exciting webinar planned for mid-February. We haven't announced who it is yet, but it's our first external host of the year. As you can remember from last year, we had people like Aaron Walters, Chris Coyer, Vitaly Freeman. So get really excited, pumped up. If you go to the URL at the bottom of this keynote, the shopify.com/partners, blog, partners, webinars, and sign up to get updates, we'll let you know as soon as that comes out. So we should be announcing that in the next couple weeks. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and we look forward to uploading this video and sending it to you so you can review and try doing your own BuyButton coding. And again, thank you so much, Tessa, and we hope everyone has a great day. Bye.